You're listening to the God Life Culture Podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we just want to say welcome to the God Life Culture Podcast. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope that you are blessed by our conversation. If you are a returning listener, we want to say welcome back, and we hope that you've caught up on our recent episodes and you've checked out all our reels on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and we are just grateful that you come week after week and you listen to our conversations, and we just hope that you are blessed by each and every one of them. We want to remind you, if you are not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. If you are watching us on YouTube and are not subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, comment, share, do all of those things that help put our podcast in front of more people. Yeah. How are you feeling today?
Feeling good, I think.
It's good. It's a good day.
It's a good day. It's a day where we thank the Lord for it. It's kind of like one of those days. But I think overall,
we're November, a few weeks, Thanksgiving is coming.
Yes. Christmas shopping has started. If you are a planner, some people started in July.
Listen, we talked about planning last week.
Yes.
So schedule that time to.
Yeah, this year we were not playing. We started getting people's wish list ahead of time. Just in case. And I think that, every year I always do this thing where I'm like, I don't think, let's just tell everybody we're giving them cards or something. But it never works out. You always wind up seeing something
that's
for
very
someone.
Scrooge-like.
Well, first of all, you don't know my financial situation. What if I don't have the finances to get everybody stuff?
Right. But I know the God of the finances.
Oh, glory.
And I know what he can do.
Yeah, no, but I think that, every once in a while you kind of think about maybe we'll show the downsides on gifts and stuff like that. And I've spoken about it on the pod before. I like to give good gifts. I personally like to give good and thoughtful gifts. And then, but sometimes, things may be a little tighter during certain seasons. And I think that that's something that people need to be respectful for with other people, and is an understanding that this year you may just get a tin of cookies, and it's not that I didn't think of you, it's not that you weren't important to me, it's just that unfortunately that's all that people have sometimes, the ability to give you.
It's weird because I just feel like when I receive gifts, I'm not thinking about last year they gave me this year they're giving me cookies.
Yeah.
It's just,
I think there are people that are like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there are people that bake things and will give that out. And I think to me, when it's those things, I have, she was the godmother, one of the godmothers in my wedding.
Yeah.
And she every year, for certain holidays bakes things, and she'll write a little note and give it, to us. And I think that, even those small things, those small gestures mean a lot, and it's nice,
absolutely.
And it's slamming, you know what I mean? So it's I can get a gift that I may not like, and maybe and then you get food or a snack that you're yes, like that rice pudding or that bread pudding or banana pudding, the flan, all that stuff that you're just yes.
Yeah. But anyways, that's for a later episode. Yeah. We'll talk about all the holiday and Christmas stuff. Today we're going to be speaking about something we've mentioned it a bunch of times. The idea that we're both Sunday school teachers, and kind of been doing that for quite a many years, and I think we'll talk about that, when was your first year, what was your first class, and stuff like that. But I think the idea of Sunday school Bible study, depending on how your church does it, there's a lot of churches that have moved away from the Sunday school concept, and they have Bible study on a Wednesday and just service on Sundays. They have multiple services,
or small group.
Yeah, they have
small groups. They do Bible study.
Yeah, but regardless of what you call it, Bible study, Sunday school, small group, book club with the Bible, whatever it is that you call it, let's talk about the idea of, is it important, is it effective, what can we do, and all of that. But for you, I'll ask you, when is, when you think of Sunday school and you have to think back to first memory, do you have one? Can you go all the way back and be I remember my first time in Sunday school, or my first Sunday school teacher, or my first this?
First time in Sunday school as a student?
Yeah, let's do both.
Okay, so as a student, My earliest memory of Sunday school is in the storefront church that we had many years ago, and it was actually the pastor's office at the time. And that was like a bunch of the kids. Like that's like my earliest memory of Sunday school. That was like the kids' classroom, and there was a small screen TV, but the TV itself was huge and bulky. And I just remember that's where I was introduced to a lot of like the Bible cartoons and animations, but like not even VeggieTales, like pre-VeggieTales, like the Bible storybook, things that the animations are still very crusty and grainy, and
VHS tapes.
Yeah, VHS, and it makes me sound like I'm so old. Not even 30. But anyway, the idea that that's like my earliest memory, and I think through the years, I've really enjoyed Sunday school. I think that it's funny because I was that kid that knew I wanted to be a teacher, like when I was 5. So I remember, being a Sunday school student, but always in my head, like desiring to be the teacher, or wondering like, what would it be like to be the teacher? And I always had like that teacher mind, I think, and then eventually I ended up being a teacher, and I was still a teenager, and I was teaching like smaller kids and like would help out. And then I would say my first official class, I was probably like 18, 19. And then I started teaching like the preteen group, which is like 11, 12, 13, like that age group. And I really liked that. And I taught that class for years.
Until recently, actually.
Until like 3 years ago. And then I went on a hiatus.
We'll talk about
hiatuses. And, I went on a hiatus, but I'm back.
Yeah, you're back. And you're teaching what now?
Adults.
Yeah.
Adults.
Yeah. English adult class.
The English adult class. Yeah, because our church is bilingual. So we have a Spanish adult class and then an English adult class. And so tell me about your Sunday school experience.
Yeah, I think for me, what would be my earliest memory is only a memory because I have a picture of it. And I believe it's even on my Instagram, which is, I guess, párvulos, like whatever age grade that is.
Can we talk about the names though?
I mean, I honestly don't know what American churches call that.
So like, in English speaking, right? Predominantly English speaking churches, they'll have like, preteens or like young adult, or they'll come up with names maybe for their
like tweens, like or something,
or like the world changer group, or like the like different names for like the age groups, right? Sometimes they'll do it even by grade if there's a lot of them. In Spanish, Pentecostal like church culture, they're very fancy with the names. It's like principiantes, superiores, juveniles, jóvenes, primarios, and then párvulos. What's a párvulo?
I have no idea. I just think that's just the age, like that's like early elementary.
Something.
It does. I don't know what it means. 43. No, I'm not 43. Many years, 30 years in church, and I have no idea what párvulos means.
Yeah, and that's just how they divided the classes.
But anyways, so I have a picture of that. That's the only reason why that's a memory. But my real like memory is like Hermana Lilian's class. Que en paz descanse la Hermana Lilian. She was like she was an anciana of the church, very old school, very strict. And I remember, and it's kind of messed up, but I remember when I transferred out because I aged out of her class and went into whatever the next class is. I was very excited about it. And to the point that it was very visible when I got the news that she felt bad that I did that in front of her, kind of a situation. And I felt bad. I had to apologize. My parents yelled at me for doing that. But that's my earliest memory when it comes to reference to Sunday school, Mana Lilian's class. But then after that, obviously very similar to you, like around the age of, I'll actually say before 18, but let's say 18 to be safe. I started teaching juveniles, which is like the preteens. And then from there, from juveniles to jóvenes. And that's where I was for many years, teaching youth, which in our circles, that's anyone that hasn't been married and is over the age of
18.
18? Yeah. So anyone over the age of 18. So it can range from people that were 18 to people that were 30 that I taught. And then now we're co-teachers for the English class. So that's where we're at. And it's been a great adventure. I mean, we just like very similar to you. I also had a moment where I took a hiatus as well. But we came back and we decided to kind of like revamp a couple of things and bring forth a new curriculum. And we spoke to our pastor about it and, you know, really like saw the need in our church for like a young adults class. And that was English. Specifically because our church is bilingual. And, you know, and I think that the Spanish group kind of lends itself to a certain type of culture, class culture, learning culture. And there was a need for an English side culture of that as well, which we've been, you know, developing and tapping into, you know, and I think it's been quite successful. And, you know, and it continues to be.
I think it's just that idea that, again, there are so many people who, you know, get married young now in their 20s, right? And they kind of get moved to like the adult class. And, you know, they're still like, you know, freshly married or just a few years married. And there's still things that, you know, they may not fully understand or want to, you know, find a little more relatable or just all of those things, or just even in touch with culture and the day to day that, you know, a lot of times it can be missing, especially in the Spanish, you know, church community. It's almost like you go from being, you know, a youth and then you get married at, you know, 22, 23 years old, some people even younger, right? And then you automatically go, you know, with the group of guys or girls who, you know, are so much older than you, right? So I think having that young adult that in the middle, it's good.
Yeah, and I think that culturally with our church specifically, we wind up having, I think there was a point, maybe specifically, maybe to when I got married and we came here, where there were a lot more older people, but then it's somewhere around that time where I got married, a lot of younger adults. There was like this group that rose up where, you know, it was a group that little by little started to grow, and there was a need for that as well. And, you know, it was something we spoke about, we thought about, we spoke with pastors about, and it looks to be doing really good. And I think that that's a very important topic. That whole moment in within itself is a very important subject, where sometimes churches need to reevaluate the breakdown of what's happening classroom wise. I think especially in Spanish culture, you know, we stick to these expositores, and they're broken up by certain groups and stuff like that. And sometimes you got to like pivot, and you got to make changes according to the demographic within your church. You know, if the demographic within your church is leaning towards a certain age or a certain language or whatever it is, then you kind of have to like pivot and cater to those individuals.
And even the needs of your church, right? Recognizing, you know, that there is probably a need for biblical literacy. Like people don't know, you know, as much of the Bible as maybe they did years ago, right? For whatever reason.
And I think it's important to note that there is meat that people haven't dived into in reference to stories. Because you can ask people, like currently we're doing Exodus, or we're doing like the situation with, you know, right now they're at the Red Sea and Pharaoh came and all of that or whatever. You know, those are stories that people know. Like people know the concept and the idea that Moses went to Pharaoh, let my people go, and that whole situation, and then the plagues. But when you start to dive into the details of the stories, when you start to dive in, like recently one of the classes we did was diving into the details of the plagues and how they were connected to the Egyptian gods, and why specifically God chose those plagues to be the plagues that he used, and like stuff like that, which are details that people don't really dive into.
Or even like how long the plagues lasted. You know, I think you think 10 plagues, you think for 10 days, and it wasn't like that. You know, this lasted a while.
And that's a very important point, because that specific thing came up in class because someone asked. Someone was curious about the fact, like, but wait, how long did all this happen? And then we had to be like, well, let's find out. Let's look into it or whatever, you know. And I think that aspect itself is what I've always loved about Sunday school. The ability that you have in class to ask questions, to have dialogue, to have debates, to be like, well, I don't agree with that. Or, you know what, I thought this, or I thought that. You know, one of the things that we were speaking about too was the idea of how the people of God at that moment lacked faith. When they saw Pharaoh coming with his people, they were so upset, and they were ready to go back, and they were mad at Moses. Like, Moses, how dare you take us out of here? We should have stood as slaves. And, you know, I think that a lot of times we really focus on the idea of, oh, they lacked faith. They lacked faith, even though they saw the plagues, even though God saved them from this, even though they saw that, they still lacked faith. And it was one of the people within the class that brought up the idea, as well as that, well, I think also you have to understand their mental state. You know, these were people that their whole life lived in a certain culture, which was a slave mentality culture, who that's all they've known this whole time. So that's why it's easy for them to default back into that. That's a spiritual lesson that people need to learn and apply for themselves, where there are times that you in your personal life have had a certain culture that you grew up thinking, that you grew up learning, that when you meet yourselves with opposition, or when you meet yourselves in moments of difficulty, that's your default. So a lot of time, it isn't only the fact that you're lacking faith, it's the fact that that's your default, and that's a thing in you that God has to break and create something new in your position. Once again, something that came up in conversation in one of our classrooms, as well, you know, and those are the things that I love, because unfortunately, a lot of times those aren't the subjects and the matters. And we spoke about the idea of, what's the syndrome?
Imposter?
No, not imposter syndrome. It's fine. It'll come back to me later. But the idea of that there is a psychological term with people that when they're in captivity, that they start to love their captor and they start to love that. And, you know, we spoke about that as well. And I think that unfortunately during preachings, you don't have that flexibility to ask the question and give an opinion and to be like, oh, pastor, did you think about this or whatever? Like that engagement part of it isn't there, that Bible studies or Sunday school does afford us, which is such a rich resource for us to tap into that I feel like people really underappreciate. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that even there are just certain atmospheres or environments that aren't conducive to people feeling like the liberty to ask questions, right? So I think that's always important. I think we both agree in the sense of fostering an environment where people feel comfortable to speak up and share their opinion and share their thoughts, right? And
Stockholm syndrome.
Yes,
that's what it was.
And the idea, you know, as you were speaking earlier and talking about the Red Sea, these are all stories that we assume we know.
Yeah.
We think we know Moses crossing the Red Sea. We think we know the plagues. We think we know, you know, the story of Moses. And then when you actually begin to read the Bible, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, you pick up on things that you're like, wait a minute, I just always thought it was this. Now reading it, it seems like it's that, you know, and I missed out on this one detail. You know what I mean? Like, I think people know that Moses, you know, encountered God in the burning bush, but now we went and broke that down in every, you know, what did Moses tell God? What did God tell Moses? What did Moses give as an excuse to God? What did God, you know, say back to Moses? How did God respond? And I think that it's just so easy to get caught up in the story when we were a child, that we heard of Moses in the burning bush, Moses crossing the sea, you know, the plagues. And it's easy to forget there's more to the story than just what we are aware of or what we're knowledgeable about. You have to dig deep. And that's one of the things that I think we've really been pushing in our class, is the idea of when you read the Bible, when you look at these stories, it's so much more than just the surface level. Like you said with the plagues, it's attached to the Egyptian gods. So it's almost like if you're just reading this just to read for face value, you know, you have to ask yourself questions. Why is it that this was a plague? Why is it that there were this many plagues? Why is it that God chose to do these crazy things? Well, you begin to ask yourself questions. You begin to research. And it's great when you can do that on your own, but it's even better when you can do it with others, right? And I think that that's something that Sunday school or Bible study, whatever you call it, it provides that the opportunity for you to get with other people and discuss these things. You know, if you're anything like me, a lot of times, you know, you have to talk things out. When you talk things out, it sticks better. When you talk things out, it processes better. You come up with things and you're like, whoa, like, you know, that just came to me at this moment, like kind of as I was talking about it. And sometimes it's important to do that. You can read the word on your own, and yes, do that, absolutely. But there are benefits to actually talking about it with somebody else and learning. So I think when it comes to Bible study and Bible class and Sunday school, it's super important. And I think that, like you said, it offers something that you may not get anywhere else. You know, an opportunity to ask a question, an opportunity, you know, to see how the Bible is still relevant today. And that's one of the things that when I teach, I always try to put that in the forefront, because it's so easy to look at the Bible as just another book. It's so easy to look at the Bible as just a book of stories stories and forget the power that lies in that word. And I think that oftentimes we look at this Bible, we read the stories, and it's like, yeah, that was Paul so many years ago. Yeah, that was Jesus when he was on earth. Yeah, that's Moses so many years ago, back in, Genesis and Exodus and all these things. And it's like, yes, stories happened many years ago. These things were written down many years ago, but it is still relevant today. And that's absolutely one thing where books can come and go, and books can, be for a specific time and specific era. The Bible is one of those timeless books where, someone could have picked it up 100 years ago, could have picked it up, now, could pick it up in 50 years, and they'll still be able to read the life of Moses, right? And relate to it and dig deep. And it may not be so easy. It may not be, we're not confronted with Red Seas all the times in our life. You know what I mean? But now, what does that mean for the, metaphoric Red Sea that's in front of you and the situation that you are facing?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we consciously made the decision to do was to do it chronologically. Start from Genesis and go all the way through the Bible. I feel like a lot of times when you have these books that you're using that is kind of like jumping around, that is topical. So this Sunday they're talking about this, next Sunday they're talking about that. You kind of lose the ability to connect the story. And when we start from the beginning and we're going all the way through it, and now we find ourselves in Exodus and we're trying to figure out how is this person connected to that person, is easier to draw the line, because I remember we end Genesis with Joseph and that whole story with his brothers and all of that or whatever. And then we start Exodus with Moses. Is like, what's the connection? Is there a connection? Is there a relationship? Whatever there is, there's a whole connection. There's a genealogy that you can see how exactly Moses is connected to Joseph. But when you're jumping around and you're doing like things like that or whatever, topically, sometimes it's that much more difficult to really focus on the details and see where the connections are. Because throughout the whole Bible, there's a lineage that we're following. From the minute Adam and Eve happened all the way through to Jesus, there's a lineage, but it's difficult to keep track of that when you're bouncing around with the way that certain books are like that.
Yeah, and I think that goes, to talk about the curriculum, where curriculum matters. Curriculum matters, but then you also need the right teacher to, deliver that curriculum, right? Yes. But curriculum is a great tool, and we're using the Gospel Project, and we're literally going through the Bible, right? So like you said, we started in Genesis, and it broke it down in I think about like 13 weeks, right? And then now we're in Exodus, and it's literally just going through Genesis through Revelation. And almost choked. It's one of those things where you think the story, and you think and then you start reading it and you're like, wow. Yes. Like, even just starting from Genesis 1 and the creation, it's like there's so much more in there that sometimes we just bypass, Absolutely. So I think that was another thing when we decided, to do this, and we said yes, to doing this. I think it was, okay, how are we going to present these books of the Bible and these stories that almost everyone knows, and that can be a challenge in of itself, you know?
Yeah, because you're breaking down that, that thought when people are like, okay, we're going to speak about Genesis and we're starting with the creation. Oh, I already know it. It was 7 days. On the seventh day, he rested. And it's like, yeah, but you don't. You don't really know it. You don't really understand, because there is a depth that when it comes to the Bible that a lot of times we don't take the time to really cultivate and learn and listen and, read into that revelation that's in the Bible, because sometimes we don't have the time for it, or we don't know how to. We don't really understand how to do that. And
I think that's a big thing. The not understanding, not knowing. And there's so many different versions of the Bible. So if you struggle to read the Bible, period, and then you go and grab the King James Version, I'm sorry for you. That's going to be miserable, So it's also just keeping all those different things in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that with the tool that is Sunday school, and you have a great teacher, an effective teacher, a teacher that knows how to break down a biblical situation, but also knows how to tie in 2022 scenarios where this is applicable, it just becomes that much more easier for you to understand and make the connection. When you have a teacher who can focus on in the details that are important, in the details that are meaningful, in the details that if you did not stop to reread that verse, you missed it. And it's kind of like, no, but let's go back. Let's read that. What's the significance? And I do this a lot in my class as well, where I'm like, okay, what's the significance of Genesis 2 this, or Exodus 3 that, or whatever. And we have conversations on that, because there's a lot of verses, is a couple of words, 7 words, that has a lot of information in it, or has a lot of purpose that dictates what happens moving forward, that a lot of people, we just glance right over it because it's just a little sentence to the blind eye doesn't mean anything. And we kind of have to, like, we're teaching people like how to pause and cultivate the idea of, okay, but dig into that. Why do you think God worded it that way? Or why did you think he chose that word or that verbiage or that this or that? And it just helps you really, like, listen, we've been teachers. I've been teaching for many, many years. And throughout, we started this back in June, was it?
I think a little bit before June.
Let's be safe, let's say June or whatever. That there's been times where I've sat down and like, you know what? I never looked at it like that.
Absolutely.
I really, honestly, I never noticed that detail. I never noticed this. I never noticed that. So as the teacher, I'm also learning. I'm also like grabbing these nuggets as well that I'm like, oh snap. Like that's crazy. Yeah. Like that's a concept, or that's an idea that I really always glanced over and never really took the time to like focus on it.
Yeah. And it's just, things that also sound crazy. Like there was that part with Moses' wife and the whole circumcision thing. She cuts the foreskin, throws it, right? All of those details that you're probably like, oh, like those are the parts of the Bible that you read through really quick. Some people, or you're just like, okay, but then when you actually go and dig deep, right, which we're not going to do right now, so that's like let the curiosity lead you to go research, right? But it's the idea of even that moment meant something. And that was something, honestly, I never even remember reading. I remember reading the concept, right? But actually reading, it's a small paragraph, I never really sat down to read it word for word and process it. And then when you do, and then you start researching and seeing like what that moment meant, it's powerful. So I think, again, it's just, you have to be intentional with what you do. And even us as teachers, we all the time, there are things that we don't know the answer to, that we're like, I don't know, but we'll find out, and it's one of those things where, creating that environment as well, where we really don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the answers to the questions that you have, and all, of all the right things, right? But just like the students, we as teachers have our own way of trying to research as well, and trying to study and trying to learn. And there are things that we'll stop and ask ourselves questions, and we'll stop and we'll discuss, like, what do you think about this? And, why do you think that happened? And I think that's so important. You have to ask questions, as you read the word and as you study the word. And it's just something that, again, when you have an environment and an atmosphere that's, conducive to that, it's really great, and you'll feel it, So I just encourage you, if your church has a Bible study or Sunday school and you haven't attended, right, or you don't, really see the need for it, right, or don't feel like you're not getting anything out of it, give it a try. And maybe you could be that individual. If you just feel like just certain things need to be, adjusted and changed, maybe you could be that individual to bring that about. You know?
Absolutely. And I think that if you are a student or whatever that's in these classes and have a suggestion, share it. Speak on it, whether it is that you think that the material that's being used should be changed. Sometimes people just go straight off the Bible. And the Bible is amazing and the Bible is great, but sometimes you need a resource to accompany that. Maybe something that'll help you break down certain chapters, or something that will provide you with certain questions that are thought-provoking and allow you to dig deeper and stuff like that. Like, that's important too. So like finding a really good curriculum that is really good at breaking down the Bible, but also, like I said before, connecting it to relevancy and what's happening in the world today, or what people are experiencing in the world today, I think is very important as well. Because unfortunately, when you don't use those resources and those tools, it becomes very monotone, especially when you have somebody that's just reciting a story, and it's kind of like, we know that already. Like, that's just a waste of time. Like, I already know that Jonah got swallowed by a big fish. And I think that there are feelings too that you have to work through and process, because there may be the attitude, right? And it's like you have to sometimes check yourself and make sure it's like, okay,
let me look at this with the fresh perspective, you know, and there are moments where the teacher may not be giving, you know, 100% or be as effective as maybe you would want, you know, or we know that in a classroom, there's visual learners and auditory learners, different types of learners in the room. It's like, you know, what can you do to then help, or what can you do to suggest? What can you do to change that? I'm a firm believer that if you are really interested in something, that if you really have a passion for something and you want to see change, you can help implement that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, you can try and you can, you know, do your part to help make that change happen.
And I think that comes as something as simple as coming to the class prepared.
Yeah.
If you feel like maybe the conversation isn't like really going in a deeper level in a way that it's supposed to or whatever, then go to the next class prepared, ready, studied up, have a list of questions that you want to ask and throw out there, not only to the teacher, but also to the people in the class to make it more engaging. You don't have to be the teacher to be an active participant in the class. Obviously, you know, you don't want to be stepping over the toes and teaching the class on the down low in front of the teacher, but there's ways that you can go and make the class more dynamic. You know, if you're just complaining about it, but you don't come prepared, you don't read the material, you don't even participate in the classroom, then I feel like then you don't have a right to feel a certain type of way about it, because you're not an active participant. Become an active participant. Try to engage. Try to drive the conversation in the class to go in a certain direction, and then that is contagious. Other people will feel more free to give an opinion. Other people will feel more free to ask a question. The teacher will know, like, you know what, these students, they're not playing. Like, I need to make sure I come to the next class, you know, more prepared or more with my own questions and stuff like that. And it'll have a domino ripple effect that'll affect everybody positively.
Yeah. And it's funny, one thing you told me when we were looking at the curriculum, it's a 4-year curriculum. So it takes 4 years for you to go through the Bible. And we were talking about, like, you know, the different books and the curriculum, you know, and happening in 2 years and 3 years. And you had said a comment, you said, yes, but I hope that I'm not teaching. I'm not by then. I'm not expecting to still be the teacher in 4 years. And at first I was kind of like, oh, what do you mean by that? Like, you know, we're getting into this together. You need to finish this, right? You know, but it was the idea that you said, hopefully, you know, someone steps up.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's teaching from the mentality as well. Like, let's teach and let's pour into people and learn together in the hopes of one day then you could do this. Yes. And one day you could lead a group, and one day you could be a teacher. You know, for right now, we can have one adult English class, right? There may become a time where we have to split it up because there's a lot of people. So then what are we going to do then? We may need another teacher. We may need 2 or 3 other people, you know, to do this. So I think as a teacher as well, when you are leading your Bible group study or you're leading your small group, the hope is to train and disciple other people to eventually become equipped and ready to teach as well.
Yeah, and I think a very important tool that we use is visuals. You know, I know that you use visuals a little bit differently than I do, but I like to present my class in a way that people, if they're paying attention, understand how I break it down. You know, there's a visual for a question. There's a visual for, I put up the actual Bible verses. I break it down. I bring illustrations in. I bring a graph if a graph is needed or whatever, because as I am teaching, I am hoping that people are picking up on the skills on, if I ever have to teach, what is it that I'm supposed to do? Bam. There you go.
And
that's what you need to pick up on.
I'm glad that you said the difference that I use visuals differently. Right? Because last week, I think it was, you know, we have this joke about like showing movies and stuff, right? Because I've showed the Prince of Egypt as we're talking about Exodus a few times already. So I was showing it again last week, clips. Yes. But it's just funny how, because last week when, you know, I showed like 4 different clips and it was almost like, okay, this is what Prince of Egypt says. Now we're going to compare it to what the Bible says. So we played certain clips and we saw how they used creative license or how they did certain things. Like in the Prince of Egypt, when Moses got to the Red Sea, you know, the pillar of fire first appears in that moment to separate Pharaoh from the Israelites. In the Bible, that pillar of fire and cloud was there from the beginning, right? And it wasn't the pillar of fire that separated them. It was the pillar of smoke, the cloud, that caused them not to be able to see. And the fire was actually in front of the Israelites, lighting their path. So they reversed it, right? And there wasn't even a
the
pillar
movie
of
doesn't
cloud.
even make an reference to the angel of God that was there,
right?
And
so
that
all
moved
of those,
from the front to the back.
Yeah, and all those little details that, Prince of Egypt is an amazing movie, right?
Yeah.
But now once you study the Bible, it's always good to be like, let's compare it to that movie that was breaking records and all these different things at the time, and let's see what they got right and what they just switched up a bit. So visuals is very important as well, and how you use it. But I think basically what we're saying in conclusion is get to Sunday school, get to Bible study, enroll in a small group, do something where you are around other people reading the Bible, learning and talking about the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and I think that if you don't, obviously you can tell we're very passionate. We have a lot to say about it. And I think that if you feel that currently you're like, oh, that's so whack, Bible study's whack, Sunday school's whack or whatever, it really is because you haven't found the right setting, whether it is the right teacher to student ratio setting, the right culture, the right whatever. There's something about it that you haven't found that you really relate to. So make it your mission to figure that out. Whether it is, whether it's the curriculum that needs to change, whether it's the teaching style that needs to change, whether it's the language, maybe you're in a Spanish class and you need to be in an English class. You have to figure it out, because when it comes to actual like Sunday school and Bible study, I personally find it so fun when it's done right, when it's the right teachers, when everybody's engaging and everybody has questions and everybody is really like interested in the subject matter. It's really fun for me, and I could be a nerd for that, but honestly I learned so much, and it's so beneficial for me on a spiritual, like individual level, when we have those classes that are popping like that. So it's really a resource that is at everybody's disposal. You just really have to figure out the formula that works for you and the people in your church.
Absolutely. So get involved, do something, be a part of a change, be a part of what's happening, right? You may just be missing out, and it may be an awesome, program and an awesome class that you're just missing out on. So we hope that this conversation has blessed you, encouraged you, motivated you, gotten you started on your day, in the middle of your day, maybe ended your day. And we just hope that you subscribe so that you can be tuned in to every episode. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, watch us on YouTube, subscribe to us on there. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at God Life Culture Podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in and just coming week after week to listen to these conversations and be blessed.
So thank you once again for tuning into the God Life Culture Podcast. That's
God Life Culture.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.